Your Excellency and distinguished guests, I have to confess that the 2005 Anzac Day Dawn Parade service, the morning that took place, wasn't exactly my finest hour. I woke up tired and stressed and frustrated that my mother had decided to bring me along, and I didn't understand why my perfectly well-deserved sleep had been interrupted. As we drove down to the cenotaph, I asked the petulant questions I'm known for. I persisted with my mother and asked, why was it that I was going down there? Why was it that we had to go down there? And most importantly, why was it so early? And the question which was above all was the question, why do we still remember? Your Excellency, distinguished guests, and those here today, what I hope and what I wish to address you is why exactly it is that we continue to remember so many years on, and why it is that I believe very strongly that we will always continue to remember. So with the story that I was telling before, we got out of the car, and of course, much to my mother's surprise, I was quiet. I was completely quiet. And I didn't ask the usual questions, the annoying questions, because somehow a grace fell over me, a grace which decided that the solemnity of the occasion of Anzac was one that deserved my quietness and my silence. And so as I was there, I saw the many decorated young men and women bearing the medals, bearing the history, bearing the legacy of those New Zealanders who fought in World War I and World War II, and lest we not forget those other wars that have been involved in this past century. As that was taking place, I was come over truly with a great sense of real, compassionate desire to want to absolutely honour my country in the best way that I could. And of course, that was through being quiet. So the question that I would like to address today, of course, is why is it that we will continue to remember? And I think the first thing that we need to look at and that we need to acknowledge, first and foremost, is the sacrifice that these young men made. It's incredible to think that among the cobblestone streets and the terracotta slate roofs of Sarajevo, a conflict between two nations would come to then engross over 100,000 New Zealanders in the course of World War I. It's humbling to think that young men and young women like me, and like those young people here today and throughout the country, young people who had their lives and their futures laid before them, stood at a moment of moral crisis. And what I want to evaluate is how they responded to that, how brilliantly, valiantly they responded to that. The historical context is of course known to all of us, and World War I engrossed so many, but we should remember how it was sold to them, how it was sold to the young boy who decided he was going off to university, or to the young girl who decided she wanted to go off and study, to those who wanted to lay down roots, to those who wanted to explore, those whose futures lay before them, how that was all stolen and snatched away. And of course, one particular story that I want to mention is the life of a young New Zealander whose story, whose future was in many ways shaped by World War I. November 1904, recently graduated from my high school, Wellington College. A young Bernard Freiberg left with two things in mind: tenacity and strong-willed character. He had been a fantastic swimmer, as many of his classmates and leaders had attested to, and he was one of those characters who everyone often attributed as being a natural leader. He decided when he left school that he wanted to become a dentist. It's incredible to think that a man who we now bestow to history as one of New Zealand's greatest wartime heroes wanted to follow his life tending to the teeth of other people. No offense to dentists, of course. And what's remarkable about that isn't necessarily that he changed his course. What's remarkable is what he did and how he responded to the crisis of war, and how so many people, so many New Zealanders, so many young people in positions like myself responded in that time of moral crisis. Sir Bernard Freiberg had two ways to go about this. He had the way in which he would step up. He would decide he would fight for his country, he would fight for the values which he believed in, or he would retire instead to not being a part of that. And I think that though this is a complex situation, one that I can't possibly relate to or understand, for I know not the terrors and the agonies of war, is something that we can draw lessons from. And that's something that I'd like to talk about. Sir Bernard Freyberg has many stories to his name, many famous stories to his name. But one which I would like to attest to in particular is, of course, his swimming across the Gulf of Saros, when, of course, the Gallipoli landings were taking place. So Winston Churchill called Bernard Freyberg the salamander. And the reason why was because he was able to duck through bullet fire. He was supposedly the young man who could dodge away and who had, like cats, many lives. Of course, what was great about Bernard Freyberg wasn't just this remarkable talent, but his tenacity and strong-willed spirit to want to do his best. And that's what I'm interested in. His courage was carried forward by his altruism. He stood up and he told his commanding officers that when they landed at Gallipoli, he had to be along the other coast, swimming across the Gulf of Saros, lighting flares, although he was receiving great and intense fire from the Turkish forces, because he knew that that was what he could do in order to ensure that the New Zealanders landing at Gallipoli had the best fighting chance that they did. And that hallmark of heroism, that true and utter, incredible bastion of heroism, that which we look to today and which we commemorate and which we honor and which we memorialize, that was encouraged not only because of his love of country and not only because of his profound sense of duty, but because he felt that the bond of brotherhood, of fellowship, that was strong, that was necessary, and that was which carried him forward. And that was fantastic. And it's that which we can learn from. Today, I have to be honest with you. I'm no Bernard Freyberg. I doubt many people are. But as a Year 13 student who leaves Wellington College at the end of this year, as a young boy who's open up to a world without parents and who suddenly confronts the adult world, knowing and understanding that Bernard Freyberg would have stepped along these footprints and on these footsteps too, much like other war heroes, like Charles Upham, like Cyril Bassett, and in modern times like Willie Apiata, knowing that these heroes would be there too, that is encouraging and that is what carries us forward. And so what I'd like to leave you with, of course, is that the story of his courage, the story of the courage of Bernard Freyberg, that story lives on and it exists because we draw inspiration from it. It exists in the young heroes which we attribute to today for having served during World War I. But so too does it exist in the small things. Because the moral fiber of a young kid who stands up to a bully and who says that what you're doing isn't okay, that too comes from the same origin as what Bernard Freyberg's courage came from. And that was a compassion to serve and a compassion to want to do well. So Bernard Freyberg and the many countless New Zealanders who fought and whose lives and futures were displaced by World War I and the many other wars which have followed the 20th, 21st centuries, they were displaced because, of course, they responded to the moral crisis that was before them. And they decided and said they were going to stand up and they were going to do what was right. And it's that courage which we honor today and that courage which we remember. Thank you.